A recluse can make machines, or invest his visions with reality only imperfectly, by writing about them or depicting them to others who are more fortunate than he. I think it will be impossible for me to learn anything by looking at machines. Hermetically sealed, they will continue to obey Morel's plans. But tomorrow I shall know for sure. I was not able to go down to the basement today, for I spent the whole afternoon trying to find some food. If one day the images should fail, it would be wrong to suppose that I've destroyed them. On the contrary, my aim is to save them by writing this diary. Invasions by sea and invasions by the hordes of increased populations threaten them. Pains me to think that my ignorance, kept intact by the library, which does not have a single book I can use for scientific study, may threaten them too. I shall not elaborate on the dangers that stalk this island, both the land and the men, because the prophecies of Malthus have been forgotten. And as for the sea, I must confess that each high tide has caused me to fear that the island may be totally submerged. A fisherman at a bar in Rabaul told me that the Elise or lagoon islands are unstable, that some disappear and others emerge from the sea. Am I in that archipelago? The Sicilian and Ombrelleri are my authorities for believing that I am. It is surprising that the invention has deceived the inventor. I too thought that the images were live beings, but my position differed from his. Morel conceived all this. He witnessed and directed the work to its completion, while I saw it in the completed form, already in operation. The case of the inventor who is duped by his own invention emphasizes our need for circumspection, but I may be generalizing about the peculiarities of one man, moralizing about a characteristic that applies only to Morel. I approve of that direction he gave, no doubt unconsciously, to his efforts to perpetuate man, but he was preserved nothing but sensations, and although his invention was incomplete, he at least foreshadowed the truth. Man will one day create human life. His work seems to confirm my old axiom. It is useless to try to keep the whole body alive. Logical reasons induce us to reject Morel's hopes. The images are not alive, but since his invention has blazed the trail, as it were, another machine could be invented to find out whether the images think and feel, or at least if they have the thoughts and the feelings that the people themselves had when the pictures were made. Of course, the relationship between their consciousness and these thoughts and feelings cannot be determined. The machine would be very similar to the one Morel had invented, would be aimed at the thoughts and sensations of the transmitter. At any distance away from Faustine, we should be able to have our thoughts and sensations, visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, gustatory, and someday there will be a more complete machine. One's thoughts or feelings during life or while the machine is recording will be like an alphabet which the image will continue to comprehend all experience, as we can form all the words in our language with the letters of the alphabet. Then life will be a repository for death. But even then the image will not be alive. Objects that are essentially new will not exist for it. I will know only what it has already thought or felt, or the possible transpositions of those thoughts or feelings. The fact that we cannot understand anything outside of time and space may perhaps suggest that our life is not appreciably different from the survival to be obtained by this machine. When minds of greater refinement than Morel's begin to work on the invention, man will select a lonely, pleasant place, will go there with the person he loves most, and will endure in an intimate paradise a single garden. If the scenes to be eternalized are recorded at different moments, will contain innumerable paradises, and each group of inhabitants, unaware of the others, will move about simultaneously, almost in the same places without colliding. But unfortunately, these will be vulnerable paradises because the images will not be able to see men. And if men do not heed the advice of Malthus, someday they will need the land of even the smallest paradise and will destroy its defenseless inhabitants or will exile them by disconnecting their machines. Author's note. Under the epigraph, come Malthus, and in Ciceronian prose, show what a rooting population grows, until the produce of the soil is spent, and brats expire for lack of aliment. The author writes a lengthy apology with eloquence and the traditional arguments for Thomas Robert Malthus and his essay on the principle of population. We have omitted it due to lack of space. Editor's note. I watched them for 17 days. Not even a man who was in love would found anything suspect about the conduct of Morel and Fastine. I do not believe he was referring to her in his speech, although she was the only one who did not laugh at that part. But even though Morel may be in love with Faustine, why would it be assumed that Faustine returned his love? We can always find a cause for suspicion if we look for it. On one afternoon of the eternal week, they walk arm in arm near the palm groves and the museum, but surely there is nothing amiss in that casual stroll. Because I was determined to live up to my motto, ostinato rigore. I shall now say with pride that my vigilance was complete. I considered neither my own comfort nor decorum. I observed what went on under the tables as well as in the open. One night in the dining room and another night in the assembly hall, their legs touch. If I attribute that contact to malicious intent, why do I reject the possibility of pure accident? I repeat, there is no conclusive proof that Faustine feels any love for Morel. Perhaps my own egotism made me suspect that she did. But I love Faustine. She's the reason for everything. I'm afraid that she loves another man. My mission is to prove that she does not. When I thought that the police were after me, the images on this island seemed to be moving like pieces in a chess game, following a strategy to capture me. Morel would be furious, I'm sure, if I spread the news of his invention. I do not believe that the fame he might gain would make any difference to him. His friends, including Faustine, would be indignant. But if Faustine had fallen out with Morel, she did not laugh with the others during the speech, then perhaps she would form an alliance with me. Still, it's possible that Morel is dead. If he had died, one of his friends would have spread the news of his invention, or else we should have to postulate a collective death, an epidemic, or a shipwreck, which seems quite incredible. But there is no way to explain the fact that no one knew of the invention when I left Caracas. One explanation could be that no one believed him, that Morel was out of his mind, or my original idea that they were all mad, and that the island was a kind of insane asylum. But those explanations require as much imagination as do the epidemic or the shipwreck. If I could get to Europe, America, or Asia, I would surely have a difficult time. When I began to be a famous fraud instead of a famous inventor, Morel's accusations would reach me, and then perhaps an order for my arrest would arrive from Caracas. And worst of all, my perilous situation would have been brought about by the invention of a madman. But I do not have to run away. It's a stroke of luck to be able to live with the images. If my pursuers should come, they will forget about me when they see these prodigious, inaccessible people. And so I shall stay here. If I should find Faustine, how she would laugh when I told her about the many times I've talked to her image with tenderness and desperation. But I feel that I should not entertain this thought, and I have written it down merely to set a limit, to see that it holds no charm for me to abandon it. A rotating eternity may seem atrocious to an observer, but it's quite acceptable to those who dwell there. Free from bad news and disease, they live forever as if each thing were happening for the first time. They have no memory of anything that happened before, and the interruptions caused by the rhythm of the tides keep the repetition from being implacable. Now that I've grown accustomed to seeing a life that is repeated, I find my own irreparably haphazard. My plans to alter the situation are useless. I have no next time. Each moment is unique, different from every other moment, and many are wasted by my indolence. Of course, there is no next time for the image either. Each moment follows the pattern set with the eternal week was first recorded. Our life may be thought of as a week of these images, one that may be repeated in adjoining worlds. Without yielding to my weakness, I can imagine the touching moment when I arrive at Faustine's house, her interest in what I shall tell her, the bond that will be established between us. Perhaps now I am at last on the long and difficult road that leads to Faustine. I know I cannot live without her. But where does Faustine live? I've been following her for weeks. She speaks of Canada, that's all I know. But I have another question, and it fills me with horror. Is Faustine alive? Perhaps the idea of looking for a person whose whereabouts I do not know, a person who may not even be alive, strikes me as being so heartbreaking, so pathetic. Faustine has come to mean more to me than life itself. How can I go to look for her? The boat is no longer in one piece. The trees are rotten. I'm not a good enough carpenter to build a boat out of some other kind of wood like chairs or doors. In fact, I'm not even sure I could have made one from trees. I must wait until I see a ship passing the island. For so long I hoped that one would not come, but now I know I could not return alone. The only ship I've ever seen from this island was Morel's, and that was the only image of a ship, or rather, only an image of a ship. And if I arrive at my journey's end, if I find Faustine, I shall be in one of the most difficult situations I've ever experienced. Arriving under mysterious circumstances, I shall ask to speak to her alone, and will arouse suspicion since I'm a stranger to her. When she discovers that I saw part of her life, she'll think I'm trying to gain some dishonest advantage. And when she finds out that I have been sentenced to life imprisonment, she will see her worst fears confirmed. It never occurred to me before that a certain action could bring me good or bad luck. Now at a time I repeated Faustine's name. Naturally, I like to say it anyway. Even though I'm overcome by fatigue, I still keep on repeating it. At times I feel nauseated and uneasy, queasy when I sleep. When I'm less agitated, I shall find a way to get away from her, from here. But in the meantime, writing down what has happened helps me to organize my thoughts. And if I am to die, this diary will leave a record of the agony I suffered. Yesterday there was no images. Desperate in the face of the secret, quiescent machines, I had a presentiment that I would never see Faustine again. But this morning the tide came to rise, and I hurried down to the basement before the images appeared to try and understand the workings of the machines, so I wouldn't be at the mercy of the tides and would be able to make repairs when necessary. I thought that perhaps I might understand the machines if I could see them start, or at least I would get some hint about their structure. But that hope to prove to be groundless. I gained access to the power plant through the opening I had made in the wall, and, but I must not let myself be carried away by emotion. I must write all this down carefully. I experienced the same surprise and the same exhilaration I felt when I first entered that room. I had the impression of walking through the azure stillness of a river's depths. I sat down to wait, turning my back on the opening I had made. It pained me to see the interruption in the deep blue continuity of the tile. How long I stayed there basking in that beauty, I don't know. But suddenly the green machines lurched into motion. I compared them with the water pump and the motors that produced the light. I looked at them, I listened to them, I figured them gingerly, but it was no use. My scrutiny was unnecessary because I knew at once that I was unable to understand the machines. It was as if someone were looking, as if I were trying to cover up my embarrassment or my shame at having hurried to the basement, at having awaited this moment so eagerly. In my fatigue, I've again felt the rush of excitement. Unless I control it, I shall never find a way to leave this place. This is exactly how it happened. I turned and walked away with downcast eyes. But when I looked at the wall, I was bewildered. I looked for the opening I had made. It was not there. Thinking that this was just an interesting optical illusion, I stepped to one side to see if it persisted, as if I were blind. I held out my hands and felt all the walls. Bent down to pick up some of the pieces of tile I had knocked off the wall when I made the opening. After touching and retouching that part of the wall repeatedly, I had to accept the fact that it had been repaired. Could I have been so fascinated by the blue splendor of the room, so interested in the working of the motors that I did not hear a mason rebuild the wall? I moved closer. I felt the coldness of the tile against my ear and heard an interminable silence, as if the other side had disappeared. The iron bar that I had used to break the wall was on the floor where I had dropped it the first time I entered the room. Lucky no one saw it, I said, pathetically unaware of the situation. If they had, they probably would have taken it away. Again, I pressed my ear to this wall that seemed to be intact. Reassured by the silence, I looked for the spot where I had made the opening, and then I began to tap on the wall, thinking that it would be easier to break the fresh plaster. I tapped for a long time with increasing desperation. The tile was invulnerable. The strongest, most violent blows echoed against the hardness and did not even open a superficial crack or loosen a tiny fragment of the glaze. I rested for a moment and tried to control my nerves. Then I resumed my efforts, moving to the other parts of the wall. Chips fell, and when large pieces of the wall came down, I kept on pounding, blurry-eyed with an urgency that was far greater than the size of an iron bar, until the existence of the wall